Hello friends, welcome to Daily Editorial Enrichment Program presented to you by LIEX R&D team. Today we will discuss some of the important articles in the Hindu newspaper for October 26th, 2019. These are some of the important articles that we have chosen from today's The Hindu newspaper. Along with the article, we have given the issue and the page number in which you can find this article. The first article that we will be discussing today is a delayed imperative. This particular article holds significance from GS3 perspective, particularly under the subtopic Indian economy. This is very important for us from mains perspective. This particular article has been written in the context of a proposal to which the cabinet has given approval to revive BSNL and MTNL. As I told you before, the cabinet has given approval for a plan that seeks to revive the loss-making public sector telecommunication providers in India, that is BSNL, Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited, and MTNL, that is Mahanagar Telephone Nigam Limited. Why are these public sector telecommunication providers suffering losses at this particular time? First is the competition that it is facing from private players. Apart from that, it is also because of the serious growth seen in the wireless telephony sector. BSNL could not compete with these private players since it had various objectives that has burdened it in recent times. Some of the objectives which have been imposed on these public enterprises are it has to provide large-scale jobs to many people in India. It has been given the mandate to establish connectivity in the remote corners of the country. It has also been given the objective of ensuring connecting the armed forces in the country and also the responsibility of establishing connection during the natural disaster. It has to ensure the reach of its network, even the remote areas of the country where the business might not be profitable for BSNL or MTNL. These objectives have seriously undermined the financial health of these public sector telecommunication providers. These objectives have prevented technological acquisition and such other things which would have helped these companies to keep up with the competition which is growing exponentially in recent times. What the proposal contains to make sure that these loss-making public sector companies are revived, let us look into that in some greater detail. The first thing that the proposal contains is it includes the allotment of critical spectrum to the two enterprises for offering fourth generation wireless services including broadband. This is expected to improve its customer base and also the customer experience. Apart from that, the center will fund the spectrum's cost through an infusion of 20,140 crore of capital while also bearing the related GST levy of 3,674 crore. Apart from this, sovereign guarantee on bonds floated by the companies will give it the option of long-term finance at cheaper rates. Apart from this, budgetary support for voluntary retirement scheme has also been included in the proposal. Finally, the merger of both BSNL and MTNL is expected to reduce the losses and increase its capability in fighting the private companies. It is good to know that the government is not considering BSNL and MTNL at par with Air India. Unlike Air India, the government has realized that both BSNL and MTNL is a strategic asset of India. The proposal plan of the government to revive it is a very welcome step. The next article that we will be discussing today is cutting risk. This particular article holds significance from the perspective of GS2 paper, particularly under the subtopic issues related to health. This has been written from the perspective of prelims and mains. This has been written in the context of recent eradication of wild polio virus 3 in the world. Before we get into the deeper aspect of this particular article, let us understand some basic concepts of polio. Polio is caused by a virus. It is very infectious, which mainly affects young children. The virus is transmitted by person to person, spread mainly through the fecal-oral route or less frequently by a common vehicle such as contaminated water and also food. This is quite important to remember. In prelims, they try to give you such confusing statements and ask you to pick the correct statement. Okay, and other related information about polio is it multiplies in the intestine from where it can invade the nervous system and can cause paralysis. There are three strains of polio, that is wild polio 1, wild polio type 2, wild polio virus type 3. Type 3 virus is the second wild polio virus to be declared eliminated. The first was in 2015 when type 2 wild polio virus was declared eliminated. So as of now, type 2 and type 3 wild polio virus have been eliminated. With two of the three wild polio viruses eliminated, only type 1 wild polio virus is still in circulation and is restricted to just two countries, that is Afghanistan and Pakistan. India, which has an excellent polio immunization coverage, should not be complacent in ensuring its polio-free status. It should also be vigilant against something called as VAPP. Let us understand what this VAPP is. VAPP is nothing but vaccine-associated paralytic polio. It is an adverse event that is caused following exposure to OPV, that is oral polio vaccine. OPV is made with live attenuated viruses or weakened polio viruses that can result in case of VAPP. VAPP is sporadic and rare. These weakened viruses, which are given through the route of OPV, can cause polio in certain cases. Let us now look at the outcome of this particular eradication. Keeping all the background information that we discussed just few minutes ago, let us discuss the outcome. The first outcome is it opens up the possibility of switching from currently used bivalent and oral polio vaccine containing type 1 and type 3 to monovalent vaccine containing only type 1. Vaccine associated paralytic polio, that is VAPP, can be greatly reduced if we make this switch to a monovalent vaccine containing only type 1. Even globally, a switch was made in April 2016 from a vaccine containing all three types, that is trivalent, to a bivalent vaccine, which was done to reduce the number of vaccine-derived polio viruses case. With the elimination of type 3, now we can move on to the monovalent vaccine, which will further reduce the VAPP cases, thereby improving the coverage and immunization of polio. In spite of the polio-free status that India has, India should make sure that it is eternally vigilant to ensure it remains polio-free. It should also step up its effort to eliminate VAPP from the country. In this regard, it has to take notices and measures to make that monovalent vaccine is available throughout the country for its proper usage. The next article that we will be discussing today is India's Big Foreign Policy Shakeup. This article is important for us from the perspective of GS2 paper, particularly under the subtopic International Relations. It is mainly a mains-oriented topic. The context in which this has been written is the changing stance of the central government on various foreign policy initiatives in the recent times, particularly from 2014 when Prime Minister Narendra Modi took to power in our country. Let us first look at some of the features of Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy. The first salient feature is the propensity of risk taking. This has become a prime feature of the foreign policy campaign of Prime Minister Modi. Example, in Doklam crisis, India took an aggressive stand towards China. Also, the events such as surgical strikes also give an example how the foreign policy of Prime Minister Modi is not averse to taking risk. Abrogation of Article 370 is also an example of the risk-taking feature of Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy. Terrorism and Pakistan have come to dominate our foreign policy initiative in recent times. both at the bilateral and also at multilateral forums. We are taking an aggressive stand towards Pakistan. We have not spoken to them bilaterally. Even at multilateral forums, we are pushing for a convention against terrorism. And also, more importantly, we are exerting pressure through various multilateral forums on Pakistan to change its behavior towards terrorism. Such high pressure was not exerted on Pakistan before 2014. This was cited as one of the reasons for the belligerent behavior of Pakistan towards India. The recent foreign policy initiative underlines a series of fundamental transformations in terms of its underlying narratives, processes, and desired endgames. There has also been a conscious and consistent effort to break with the past initiatives of various governments. The prime example of this is how India is approaching its relationship with Israel. The past governments were a bit hesitant to maintain positive relations with Israel. They did not take the present relationship with Israel to a strategic level. However, the Prime Minister Modi foreign policy initiatives have broken from that tradition and they are trying to improve relationship with Israel. And there are many examples such as this to explain how Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy is a clear breakaway from the past. His recent absenteeism from NAM is also an example of this particular breakaway. Another feature of Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy initiative is we can describe those particular policy as being too rigid. Too rigid position taken by India under Prime Minister Modi has put it in difficult places in certain scenarios. For example, it is unable to play a critical role in the Afghanistan peace process because of its rigid stance against engaging with any terrorist outfit. Its rigidity towards separatists in J&K is also complicating the matter. If we are able to play a constructive role in the Afghanistan peace process, it will be not only beneficial for the Afghanistan but also for other countries in the region. Our rigid stance should show some flexibility towards this particular end. Foreign policy, unlike other times, has become a tool for achieving domestic political outcomes. In various campaigns across India, Prime Minister Modi and some of his top ministers like Rajnath Singh, Amit Shah politicized the issue of surgical strikes, air strikes which was conducted against Pakistan. Such domestication of security matters has become a prominent feature of foreign policy of nowadays. What are the problems with the present foreign policy under Prime Minister Modi? Just a few minutes ago, we explained the New Delhi's apparent inability to play a noteworthy role in the emerging Afghan geopolitics. This is something that we have to remember. Apart from this, another concern or problem with the foreign policy of now is domestic politicization of foreign policy also instills a winner-takes-all mentality in the ruling dispensation, thereby shrinking the domestic space for consensus building. This is quite important. Whenever it came to foreign policy announcements or achieving objectives through foreign policy, there was always an effort made by the party in power to build consensus not just among the center but also involving the state governments to take in their recommendations and their concerns. However, such consensus building is not being taken up by the government. The method of using foreign policy decision to cater to domestic opinion will lead the leadership to a commitment trap as well as bind its hands when the external circumstance demand a change in behavior. For example, if there is any escalation in terror attacks from Pakistan, India will be forced to take much harder stance against Pakistan. This will escalate tension in the region between two countries which possess the technology of using nuclear weapons. Let us summarize this particular article. Whatever foreign policy initiatives we have, there must always be an underlying vision to India's foreign policy. Our policy initiatives should be directed to achieve certain well-defined outcomes which are arrived through thorough consultation. The keyword over here is thorough consultation with all those involved. It might be other parties at the central level, it might be regional parties at the state level. Foreign policy should involve all the stakeholders. Belligerent foreign policy of Prime Minister Modi might seem attractive to the eyes, but when the day ends, the objectives that it achieves is still a question that needs to be answered. The next news that we'll be discussing today is activists cry foul as government notifies RTI rules. This particular article is important for us from the perspective of GS2 paper. Can be asked under the subtopic governance or acts and policies of the government and its effects and issues in implementation. Activists have objected to new rules under the Right to Information Act that have reduced the tenure of information commissioners from 5 years to 3, saying the changes would affect their independence due to changes made by the government in RTI rules. The Right to Information Rules 2019, notified by the Ministry of Personnel, Public Grievance and Pension, set the tenure of information commissioners at 3 years and gave the government the discretion to decide on the conditions of service for which no express provisions are made in the rules. There has been a complete violation of the pre-legislative consultation policy of 2014. It was drafted in a manner which did not involve any consultation. Apart from that, the government has been given the power to relax their provision, which raised serious concerns that government could potentially invoke these powers to determine different tenures for different commissioners at the time of appointment. This will reduce the autonomy that is given to information commissioners. This will have a greater impact on bringing down transparency, accountability. At the end of the day, it is the citizens' right to information that will be affected because of this notification. In GS2 paper, particularly in the mains, there might be a question asking you to analyze or comment on the recent notification made by the government on the RTI rules. One has to remember all these issues and give examples on how this will affect the working of the RTI in our society. The last news that we'll be discussing today is Congress says RCEP trade deal will jolt economy again. This particular article is important for us from the perspective of GS3 paper, particularly under the subtopic Indian economy. Let us now look into some of the concerns that have been highlighted by the Congress in making such statement. Opening our market for cheaper goods from countries like China and South Korea. This will lead to a trade deficit with as many as 11 RCEP countries. Apart from this, the other concerns that they have raised with respect to RCEP deal is with respect to country of origin. The RCEP draft is also opposed to data localization. Apart from that, they have also raised concerns with respect to domestic content and agreement on services. From the perspective of prelims, it is quite important that we remember certain crucial aspects with respect to RCEP deal. RCEP is nothing but an Asian-centered proposal for a regional free trade area which would initially include the 10 Asian member states and those countries which have existing free trade agreements with the Asian organization. The objective of launching RCEP negotiation is to achieve a modern, comprehensive, high quality and mutually beneficial economic partnership agreement that will cover trade in goods, trade in services, investment, economic and technical cooperation. It will also include intellectual property, competition, electronic commerce, dispute settlement and other issues. Look at some of the important ones. RCEP has the potential to deliver significant opportunities for businesses in the East Asian region. This will go well with the Act East policy of Indian government. Apart from that, the size of the 16 RCEP countries account for almost half of world's population. It also contributes about 30% of global GDP and over quarter of the world exports. This will help India to integrate well with the supply chains in the East Asian market. RCEP will also provide a framework aimed at lowering trade barriers and securing improved market access for goods and services for business in the region. This will help India to get a much better export potential. From both the perspective of prelims and mains, it is quite important to understand why RCP negotiation is taking such a long period of time. We have to find issues on which India has raised concerns with respect to RCEP trade deal. We have to find out how this will affect or impact our economy as a whole. What will be the effect of RCEP on trade? What will be the effect of RCEP on agriculture? Such kind of questions needs to be answered. There are various editorials that have been written on RCEP trade before. It is advisable for the aspirants to revisit some of these editorials and understand some important points that will enrich and add value to your preparation. This was the last piece of news for today's daily editorial enrichment program discussion. Thank you.